We will start from our comrades CARC party. Please be ready for the floor. And the next will be the NATO National Coordination. So I hope you can be ready for your contribution. Okay, we will start with our comrades from CARC.
Okay.
We invite
Comrades, we bring to this conference some lessons from the major mobilizations that took place in Italy between September and October 2025 against the genocide of Palestinian people, the complicity of the Meloni government, and Italy's participation in imperialist aggressions around the world. Every Communist Party and every anti-imperialist organization must develop its own line of action based on a concrete analysis of the concrete situation. The exchange of experience and the sharing of the lessons that each party and organization draws are an essential ingredient in the development of the new revolutionary wave, because the proletarian revolution is an international process, and there is one single science for it. In September and October 2025 in Italy, the mobilization in solidarity with the Palestinian people took a leap forward. It became the unifying force and the catalyst for the myriad struggles against the effects of the general crisis of capitalism, against the Third World War, into which the crisis has already spilled over, and which the international community of US, Zionist, European, and associated imperialist groups is expanding. The war promoted by the international community of imperialist groups does not concern only the countries under attack. To wage the war externally, the imperialist bourgeoisie must also wage war against the masses in imperialist countries. They impose war economy, increase military spending, cut wages and public services, suppress strikes, criminalize internationalist solidarity. The imperialist groups attempt to subordinate all economic and political life to their interests. For this reason, when ports, factories, railroads, schools, and universities are blocked in imperialist countries, it is not merely an expression of solidarity that unfolds. It is a concrete blow to the economic, political, and military machinery that fuels the oppression of peoples and weakens the political, economic, and social base that imperialist groups need to wage their wars. Last fall, general mobilization has become a people's movement and a wave of insubordination against the Meloni government. This is thanks to the initiative launched by the Autonomous Port Workers Committee, CALP, a workers' organization that has been active for years in the fight against arms trafficking, and which, in this arena, has taken on a leading role, serving as a model and an authoritative voice. In fact, CALP made a call to block everything if the Flotilla is attacked, and the Unione Sindacale di Base, USB, the country's main grassroots union, took up and expanded this slogan by calling for a general strike on September 22nd, 2025. The slogan "Let's block everything" translated into strikes, demonstrations, and coordinated initiatives. The days of September and October 2025 had favorable results for the popular masses. First, they involved workers from various sectors, students, pensioners, and homemakers. They garnered sympathy and support among shopkeepers, taxi drivers, and other self-employed workers. Because when the working class takes the lead in the struggle, it also draws in sectors of popular masses traditionally considered a voting base and a source of maneuvering power for right-wing bourgeoisie. Second, they mobilized the main unorganized people who joined the struggle for the first time or who returned to it after having withdrawn into private life because they were disillusioned by the failures of past battle. Third, they fostered the emergence of new workers and popular organizations and pushed the existing ones to raise the level of direction, take on new tasks, and coordinate their efforts. Fourth, they have expanded acts of civil disobedience and methods of struggle, such as blockades of ports, train stations, highways, which were previously the preserve of only a few organizations, demonstrating in practice that when the mass mobilize, no bans, anti-strike laws, or threats can hold them back. Fifth, they also forced the CGL, the main pro-regime union, to call a strike alongside the grassroots union on October 3rd, which was a day of unified general mobilization. The first important lesson is this: When organized workers take the initiative and lead the struggle, they draw in sectors of masses and compel to act even trade union and political organizations, including those most deeply integrated into the imperialist bourgeoisie system. Through the events of September and October 2025, the masses have seen firsthand that, when they organize, they can influence the political course of the country and beyond. The false peace agreement promoted by the Trump administration in the fall of 2025 was also the result of mobilizations that turned Zionist crimes in Gaza Strip into a political issue, particularly in the imperialist countries. The ruling classes had to take action to contain the mobilization and regain control of the situation. The organization and mobilizations of workers and the rest of the masses in the imperialist countries thus constitute a front in the struggle against the global imperialist system. The imperialist bourgeoisie fears that the masses will move from single protest to fight the entire political system and from solidarity with the oppressed peoples to the struggle for power in our countries. This transition does not occur spontaneously. It requires the conscious interventions of communists to multiply, strengthen, and coordinate workers and popular organizations in capitalist and public enterprises, in local communities, and on specific issues, and to guide them toward taking the control of the country. Workers and popular organizations are the modern-day equivalent of the Soviets in Russia. In Italy, we of the CARC party and in various forms the new Italian Communist Party in the underground support trade union and political struggles for specific demands. We also support participation in elections and in the struggles regarding the measures taken by the authorities. But in the struggles of the popular masses, we aim primarily to promote the formation of workers and popular organizations, and we guide them to coordinate and challenge the measures of the bourgeois authorities to the point of making it impossible for the bourgeoisie to govern the country. This way, we can force the bourgeoisie to accept the formation of a government composed of people who enjoy the confidence of workers and popular organizations, what we call the popular bloc government. Every strike, blockade, occupation, and form of spontaneous resistance by the masses must become a school of communism, a training ground where the masses learn to organize themselves, coordinate their efforts, identify enemies and allies, and exercise leadership. A training ground where they learn not only to defend themselves against the effects of the war and crisis, but to go on the offensive. They learn to act as a society's new ruling class, as a new public authorities that determine and implement the measures necessary for the masses. Blocking everything is necessary, but it is not enough. We must halt the course imposed by the international community of imperialist groups, the US, NATO, the EU, and the Zionists, to pave the way for a new course of events. With the line of the popular bloc government, we of the caravan of the new Italian Communist Party aim for two objectives. One, the rebirth of the communist movement, and two, the railing of the working class around the Communist Party. We pursue these two objectives based on the current conditions. The Communist Party still has little support and influence among the working class. The bourgeois left, composed of non-communist opponents of Italian imperialist groups, enjoy greater support and influence among the popular masses than we do. With the popular bloc government line, we aim to create a situation in which non-communist opponents govern the country on behalf of the organized popular masses. The popular bloc government will operate against the bourgeois party and more generally against the EU, the European Central Bank, the International Monetary Fund, and NATO. The formation of the popular bloc government is a stage in the socialist revolution, in the protracted revolutionary people's war against the imperialist bourgeoisie, which will culminate in establishment of socialism. The mobilizations of 2025 revealed both a possibility and a limitation. They demonstrated that the masses can bring the country to a standstill and compel even large organizations to mobilize. The limitation was the failure to fully transform this force into a struggle to oust the Meloni government and impose a regime change in favor of the masses. The mobilizations of 2025 therefore confirmed that we communists must build on the resistance that already exists, organizing, coordinating, and elevating it, transforming every struggle into a step toward the power of the masses. The rebirth of the communist movement in imperialist countries, it is not only necessary, but possible. It advances to the extent that communists transform every mobilization into a school of organization, of struggle for power, of government by the masses, into a school of communism. Advancing the revolution in imperialist countries is also the greatest contribution we can make to the struggle of the oppressed peoples. forward in the struggle against the global imperialist system. Long live internationalist solidarity. Long live the struggle of the masses and oppressed people of the world.
Thank you, dear comrades. Now we will hear from NATO
Teşekkürler
National
sevgili
Coordination.
yoldaşlar. Şimdi biz NATO Ulusal Koordinasyonu'ndan yapılan katkıyı dinlemek istiyoruz. Evet, teşekkürler.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Herkese iyi öğleden sonralar.
I'm here in Istanbul.
Buradan İstanbul'dan katılıyorum.
I can say that it's very important to express our solidarity to the young people now in the jails in Turkey. And
Türkiye'deki gençlerle dayanışma duygularımızı paylaşmak istiyoruz. Bu noktada önemli hususlardan bir tanesi şu. Biz oldukça aktif çalışmalar yürüten bir grup insanız. Ve burada da başka aktif isimlerle bir arada bulunmaktan mutluluk duyuyoruz. Şu anda söyleyebileceğimiz şeylerden biri şu. Sevgili yoldaşlar, biz sizlere İtalya'dan NATO karşıtı koordinasyonun selamlarını iletiyoruz. Bu 11. Uluslararası
We are here to enhance an international front against NATO, against the imperialism US-led, and against the ongoing World War III, with the aim to share with you the experience we developed in these years of struggle. The NATO National Coordination was born to counter this reality, having the goal to put together grassroots initiatives and efforts willingly appeared among ordinary people, committees against military bases, political organizations, unions, student groups, associations, workers, youngs, and also single activists. We are born to create a coordination, unity of action and shared goals. NATO National Coordination works on more levels: advocacy, investigation, mobilization, and organization. At the beginning of 2026, we published a dossier about US and NATO installations in Italy. We are not presenting this work as a definitive, exhaustive study, but it is only a first step to make people aware about the military presence on the Italian territory. This is useful for the activists for ordinary people, so for activists and ordinary people aiming to get more detailed information. The dossier maps 137 military and civil installations directly managed, used, or created by US and NATO apparatus or simply offered by the Italian authorities. This book was carried out thanks to the experience gained in years of struggle against US and NATO occupation in our country. Let's think about the mobilization against MUOS, the advanced military satellite system on the island Sicily. Let's consider the struggle on the island Sardinia against the military exercises and against the military fire ranges. Let's admire all the battles against the bases all over Italy and the increasing war economy. Our watchword is very clear: Italy out of NATO, NATO out of Italy. This means to shut down US and NATO military bases, to stop sending weapons to countries promoting World War II, World War III, to break the subordination of our country to US, Zionist, and European imperialism, to counterattack the rearmament and militarization. So Italy is nowadays a military platform in the Mediterranean Sea. Bases, ports, airports, military fire ranges, and military training grounds, military oil pipelines, armaments industries, and command centers. All these form a single system at disposal of imperialistic wars now and for the future. This dossier was created to collect, update, and share information with the mass, focusing on socializing this information. So with the aim of promoting new local investigations, unveiling economical and political links between military bases and the territory, making explicit the activities carried out, showing the companies involved in this business, clarifying the dimension of the net of military transport, focusing on the deep involvement of the political institutions. Every local organism can use this dossier as a starting point, updating and developing it, transforming it into a mobilization campaign, into a public complaint, into a popular assembly. It is necessary to know, not only to make public the information, but to organize ourselves, to act and struggle till NATO and US will leave our country. An important mobilization all over Italy was the 4th April 2026 for the anniversary of NATO foundation. In Gedi, Italian military air base near Lake Garda in northern Italy, part of the NATO disposal nuclear sharing, where around 40 nuclear US bomb B-61 are stocked. In Capo di Chino, near Naples, an important US NATO military installation linked to the naval support activity Naples and to the Allied command system for the Mediterranean area. At the Joint Operation Headquarters responsible for operations and military exercises in Italy and abroad, this headquarters is located in the highly inhabited district of Tuscolano in the capital of Rome. In the district Borgo Panigale in Bologna, crossed by the military oil pipeline NIPS to supply military aeroplanes. In Florence, in front of the NATO headquarters, Multinational Division South, responsible for operations for South and Mediterranean area. So, where the war machine is active, we brought there the struggle with our rage and our watchword, Italy out of NATO and NATO out of Italy. It is very important not to waste this work and these results got in our country. After the huge demonstrations and strikes that paralyzed Italy in September and October 2025, the mobilizations do produce contacts, trust, experience, organizational skills. So we do have to ensure continuity. So we won't start always from zero. Every step must become the base for a new step forward. The National Assembly of the No-NATO National Coordination that is being held today in Rome is an important moment to make an assessment, to further promote the coordination, to join the existing campaigns, to create a more solid front, bringing the struggle to a more advanced level. 3 issues will be crucial. The first one is the struggle against the conscription and against every type of military enlistment of the youngs. The governments want the youngs to get used with the war, with the military discipline, with the sacrifice for imperialistic bourgeoisie. We do say that the youngs have to organize themselves against the war and not to be enlisted in the war. The second issue is the workers' conscientious objection. In a rearmament and militarization phase, the right to refuse the war is
conclusion, please.
Sorry? Can you hear me? Okay, so I don't know what happened. The second one is, so The workers' conscientious objection in the rearmament and militarization phase, the right to refuse the war is a very actual battleground for political and civil strife. We must support whom refuses the enlistment in every form, who denies to collaborate with the military apparatus, whom doesn't want to be complicit with imperialistic wars. The third one is the declassification of military agreements. The popular masses must know which agreements tie Italy to the United States of America, to NATO, and to Israel. It is imperative to explicit which bases exist, which weapons are stocked inside, what type of operations start from Italian territory. Secrecy is a tool to dominate. Breaking the secrecy means enhancing popular mobilization. All this is strictly related with the implementation of Article 11 of the 1944 Italian Republican Constitution, the Constitution which states Italy repudiates war as an instrument of offense to the freedom of other peoples and as a means to settle international disputes. So governments celebrate it in words alone, but the popular masses have the real charge of implementing it by deeds with struggle and grassroots actions. In imperialistic countries, the popular masses have a decisive role. They are the only force able to break the chain of the community among imperialistic groups from US, NATO, EU, and Zionist movement. Solidarity with aggressed people can be just a statement. It must turn into a struggle against our governments, initiatives against our bases, against our weapon factories, demonstrations against the way to manage our ports, airports, and railways for war purpose. During September and October demonstrations, the actions of dock workers in the hub ports of Genova, Livorno, and Ravenna, then the actions of railway workers on Leonardo armaments industry workers, and also the medical sector workers showed us the right path. So when workers and popular masses call for a strong, clear, and advanced mobilization, the slave governments of the imperialistic bourgeoisie cannot deny their presence and look the other way.
Comrades,
they can ignore them
conclusion,
because,
please.
Yes, just a second. They perfectly know they can lose control over popular masses in their own country. So NATO is international, and the struggle against NATO so must be too. But internationalism lives if every single force hits the war machine in his own courtyard. So, concluding, Italy out of NATO, NATO out of Italy. No to imperialistic wars, no to the rearmament, no to militarizations. Let's build together a common international front against NATO and against imperialism. Thank you very much.
Thank you, comrades. We will invite Freedom Flotilla from Italy as our next speaker. Please keep the speech time as 10 minutes, and the next will be the Risorgere from Italy after our comrades Freedom Flotilla.
Good morning to all of you. Freedom Flotilla Italia, after 39 missions organized toward Gaza since 2010, with the aim of breaking the siege, the illegal naval blockade imposed by the State of Israel, the most recent of which I personally joined last September as the only Italian woman aboard a sailing vessel departing from Puglia, launched a new project in May 2026. Called 100 Ports, 100 Cities. This is a national civil mobilization tour involving Palestinians living in Italy, activists, and all those who stand in solidarity with the Palestinian cause. Our vessel, the Kissan Kanafani, is sailing from port to port along the Italian coastline, while our camper van travels through the inland territories, uniting Italy in one great corridor of solidarity, awareness, and shared commitment. The boat is currently in Liguria, having departed from Puglia and already called at Calabria, Sicily, Sardinia, Campania, and Tuscany. In every region, we meet and engage with countless people, workers, men and women, with the aim behind keeping the spotlight on what is still happening in Gaza, of also addressing the specific social, labor, economic, environmental, and health issues of each territory. Because yes, we seek to bring Palestine to all of Italy through 100 ports and 100 cities. But it is equally true that the Palestinian cause and the injustices that Palestinian people have suffered for over 70 years represent the slippery slope of law and the distortion of imperialism and capitalism that have globalized, deepened, and became normalized, especially over the past 5 years. As Freedom Flotilla Italia, we stand with those who resist in their own lands, ravaged and plundering by those who feast on crises and shocks that are so often deliberately induced. As Freedom Flotilla Italia, we stand with those who resist in their workplaces, with those who resist through the hardships of their daily lives. Since October 2023, it took 2 years to fill the streets of Italy with unprecedented demonstrations. We all remember what happened on 3 and 4 October last year. In Rome alone, around 2 million people took the squares to protest. The Israeli bombardment of Gaza, the genocide in the Strip, made it possible to wave a network among the many grassroots movements that have rallied around the Palestinian cause. The attack on the flotilla was described by the professor Donatella Della Porta, political science scholar and director of the Center on Social Movement Studies at the School Normale Superiore in Florence, as the trigger that set off all at once the energy accumulated over 2 years of acts of resistance and civil disobedience. The mobilizing grew steadily. From the major cities, it spread to the provinces and there to tourist destinations. It reached hospitals where the link between resources invested in war and the shortage of staff and equipment in public health care became glaringly obvious. It reached citizens who had never mobilized before. It spread into the world of work, into universities, where students who had occupied campuses and set up tent encampments. So their protests intertwined with those of lectures over institutional ties with Israel, eventually drawing in even technical and administrative staff and into the ports. The channeling of energy into ports was powerful from the very outset, from the departure from Genova, with an enormous number of people involved, the presence of the mayor, the blessing of the archbishop, and all the media crowded together. It is worth remembering that in Genova, the CALP, CALP, the Autonomous Dockers Collective, has been mobilizing against the arms trade since 2019 in a place where neoliberal economics have worsened working conditions. We are often led to believe that economic interests come before moral ones, but sometimes it is the moral shock that surges forward with overpowering force. Not in my name is the cry of moral revolt that must unite us all, starting from the highest principles rather than isolation and individualism of micro grievances. It is with this very cry that more than 1 million European citizens have signed a petition calling for the suspension for the trade agreement between the European Union and Israel. And it is with this cry that in cities like Bari, my cities, and Florence, collectives, activists, and organizations in solidarity with the Palestinian cause are urgently demanding that local administration and regional governors close their respective Israel honorary consulates through permanent pickets, signature campaigns, and protest demonstrations. Young people in Italy have shown that they are engaging with politics, and indeed they represented the majority of those who voted no in the last March's referendum on the justice reform proposed by the Meloni government, because our anti-fascist and democratic constitution will not be touched. This shows that we are living in a moment of high ethical tension in history, as in the 1968 or in the years of the Vietnam War, in which, driven by moral shock, the reflection to be made and the proposal to be put forward must be led by the head, not the gut. Democracies are experiencing degeneration and oscillation never seen before, and this is made clearest above all by the policies pursued by what, until recently, we consider the most foremost economic and military power, the United States, and by what we call the democratic outpost of the West in the Middle East, the State of Israel. This is not only about stopping the bombs, the genocide, the illegal occupation, and the exploitation for the benefit of you, of resources that should belong to everyone. It is about building a society governed by the right of every people to exist with dignity, to live in peace and to self-determination, a society that is more equitable and just. Thank you.
Thank you, comrades. We will give the floor to our comrades from Italy, Risorgere.
Thank you. Good morning, comrades. On behalf of our organization, Risorgere, I would like to thank you for organizing this 11th International Conference of the World Anti-Imperialist Platform and for giving us the opportunity to participate. We come from Italy, a country that belongs to the collective West, which, in the name of the interests of a handful of financiers, speculators, and even pedophiles, has declared war on the rest of the world, threatening the very existence of humanity, and which, if it could, would not hesitate to drag all of humanity into the grave with it. Like most other European states, Italy lives in a condition of profound subordination to the imperialist center. Since the late 1940s, with the creation of Nato and the beginning of the European federalist process, our country has been progressively deprived of any real national sovereignty. Our institution, our armed forces, our judiciary, the police, the media, academia, and the cultural sphere have all been thoroughly infiltrated by agents of the imperialism, who have pursued the interests of the regime in Washington and its servants in Brussels and Tel Aviv, at the expense of the interests of the Italian working masses. The result of this process is plain for all to see. A deindustrialized country, incapable of guaranteeing its inhabitants a dignified existence of any meaningful prospects for the future. A tiny circle of major bourgeois speculators has amassed immense fortunes through privatizations, the largest carried out anywhere in Europe, and through Italy's subordinate integration into the Americans' hegemonic system as genuine compradors. At the same time, the Italian popular masses have seen their social rights and access to essential public services drastically reduced, while unemployment, emigration, and material and moral decline have spread throughout the country. Italy, like the other PIGS countries of Southern Europe, Portugal, Italy, Greece, and Spain, has paid the highest price for European integration. To the predatory mechanism of the US dollar and the Washington Consensus have been added those of the European Commission, the euro, and the European Central Bank. The wealth produced by the labor of entire generations of Italians has been plundered in the name of austerity with the consent of both the political right and the liberal left. The most disgraceful and painful aspect of the condition in which our country finds itself is not, however, economically plunder. Hundreds of millions of human beings have lived under imperialist domination and witnessed their nations stripped of their wealth, yet they preserved their dignity and resisted the oppressor alongside the other peoples of the world. What humiliates us most is seeing Italians compelled to support imperialism with their weapons or with their resources. This pains us even more when we think of the colonial past of monarchical Italy, whose governments engage in shameful, criminal, and pointless wars of conquest. This feeling grows even stronger when we remember those generations of Italians who, in the struggle for the unification of our country, for the defense of its independence, and later in the fight against fascism, gave their lives while embodying very different principles and displaying far greater dignity. Thousands of Italian soldiers have been deployed as Euro-American colonial troops in numerous theaters of war, tasked with stabilizing countries devastated by NATO aggression. Military bases on Italian soil made possible the bombings of Serbia and Libya. From bases located in Italy, particularly in Sicily, drones are launched that assist the Kiev regime in its terrorist activities against the Russian population of Crimea. Italian weapons arm Ukrainian extremists responsible for war crimes, while Italian-made components have been found in the drones that killed 21 students in Starobelsk. The Italian government has supported every initiative of American imperialism, reaching levels of subordination unknown even during the Cold War. Our government has supported the war launched against the Russian Federation, the attacks on Iran, the genocide committed in Gaza, the aggressive maneuvers in the Asia-Pacific against the People's Republic of China, the kidnapping of President Maduro, and the economic strangulation of Cuba. We Italians do not live under bombardment, and we still enjoy a degree of prosperity denied to many countries of the global south. Nevertheless, we believe that there is no future for Italy within the West. Indeed, because of our historical experience, our cultural heritage, and the imprint of our Latin and Roman Catholic civilization, will feel closer to the people of the global south. Our true allies are not the American democracies, but rather the peoples of the world who are fighting against imperialism and the international working class that is building day by day the emerging reality of socialism. We want to play our part in the struggle that pits humanity against the forces of imperialism, in order to win the right to live in a free country and to redeem decades of humiliation. National independence and support for the process of building a multipolar world and a community with a shared future for humanity represent for us the two inseparable elements of any genuinely anti-imperialist struggle. While the compatible left and Western Marxists obsessively repeat the falsehood of competing imperialisms, refusing to support those who are fighting for the liberation of humanity, communists recognize in the multipolar transformation of the world a great manifestation of class struggle. Multipolarity is class struggle. On one side stands the monopolistic financial bourgeoisie embodied by Washington's hegemony and its clients. On the other stand the international working class and those sectors of the national bourgeoisie that possess both the interest and the courage to oppose the current international hierarchy. There is no competition between imperialisms. The big bourgeoisie of every country does not dream of building its own empire. It dreams of placing itself at the service of American capital, trading its autonomy for the guarantee of privileged rents. From this class and from its political representatives on both the right and the left, we can expect nothing.
Dear comrades, please conclusion.
As Stalin stated in 1952, the bourgeoisie has abandoned the banner of national independence, and only the communists can take it up and raise it once again. Communists have a duty to stand at the forefront of the struggle for a multipolar world, because the consolidation of that world depends on the success of this struggle. Wherever the bourgeoisie remains in power, capitulation to the forces of imperialism is only a matter of time. Only communists have demonstrated the ability to oppose imperialism in a coherent, conscious and effective manner. It is therefore our task to wage an open and determined struggle against imperialism in those countries subjected to imperialist occupation. We must support, without hesitation, all existing socialist states, and above all, the People's Republic of China, led by Comrade Xi Jinping and guided by his thought, representing a new level in the development of Marxism. At the same time, we must sincerely support all progressive and revolutionary forces that express the interests of the working people in countries which, although not socialist, courageously oppose imperialism. Closer cooperation among anti-imperialist forces is necessary, both among states and among political and social organizations. A common struggle against the forces of the compatible left, which support imperialism directly or indirectly, is necessary. We must pool our strengths, our experiences, and our capacity in order to confront the common enemy of humanity with a united front of workers, revolutionaries, and communists, determined to overthrow it and finally build a new world. Although most of us are not on the battlefields today, we must nevertheless regard ourselves as participants in the ongoing conflict. We are at war, and each of us must fight on our own front to the best of our abilities. This is the duty of communists, the vanguard of the working class and of humanity as a whole. Only through unity and international solidarity will we achieve victory. Thank you.
Thank you, comrades. We invite our comrades from Pole of Revival Communists in France.
Yes, hello. Is it just the one? Because I was supposed to have two, but I think one is enough. I was supposed to have the solidarity statement and the anti-imperialist one, but I think one is enough. Okay? Yeah. So I belong to the Pôle de Renaissance Communiste en France. First, yeah, which stands firm, obviously, behind the youth wing of the platform in light of the recent events. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the organizers who have done a remarkable job, as ever, as they have done in France over the last couple of years, where they've staged a number of events. So, of course, it's a shame that we didn't get to meet up in person, but that will be for next time. I think, well, the recent events are a sign of the times, and we just have to be more careful in the future. And this is what my talk is about. So, dear friends and comrades, the Pôle de Renaissance Communiste en France fights for the 4 no's. So it's no to NATO, no to the EU, no to the euro, and no to capitalism. As concerns imperialism, of which NATO is the embodiment, Iran's victory over the United States marks a turning point for the anti-imperialist movement. It represents the biggest defeat for imperialism since the Vietnam War. And it is even more momentous than the Vietnam War, insofar as the valiant Viet Cong certainly drove the Americans out of Vietnam, but won. At the time, there was a strong opposition to the war inside the USA itself, And also Vietnam benefited from the support of the Soviet Union, while Iran single-handedly defeated the most important American aggression precisely since Vietnam. And two, because Iran has even increased its sphere of influence with its control over the Hormuz Strait. Iran is now a force that everyone in the region and even beyond is going to have to reckon with. The Iranian-American agreement could even help preserve the integrity of Lebanon from the designs of the Greater Israel. Now, nothing will be the same again. The imperialist camp is divided, and the EU, Japan, South Korea, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand have refused to follow Donald Trump, in Iran, that is. Yet we must remain wary despite Iran's victory, and we must not let the US turn against Cuba. Indeed, imperialism is more than ever alive and kicking, especially US imperialism, which attacks every progressive anti-imperialist country in the world that strives to achieve social change and self-development, as proven by the scandalous kidnapping of President Maduro in Venezuela and the starving to death of socialist Cuba. Why so? Well, the West is losing ground on the economic front with the rise of the BRICS, especially China. The West is also losing ground militarily, with Russia holding its own in Ukraine against all the imperialist or allied countries to varying degrees of involvement, despite the growing provocations of NATO, which is behind the pro-Nazi regime in Kiev. As the United States produces less and less civilian equipment nowadays and specializes more and more in weapons, it has turned to destruction with its arms industry. Historically, the military-industrial complex has always profited from war. There is only one way out for especially American imperialism: brazen aggression, left, right, and center in desperation in the form of international terrorism. Covert action, soft power, once favored by the USA, is increasingly giving way to physical attack, flouting international law in the shape of all-out war. In this sense, international terrorism is practiced by the US on a worldwide scale to bully whole countries into submission. When it cannot decapitate a country's leadership, that's known as regime change, imperialism resorts to terrorism. Now, despite the setbacks in Syria and Libya, two regimes that had always supported the Palestinian cause, the forces of progress and independence are better placed than ever to prevail. The problem is the West is prepared to do anything to keep its power, even destroy the whole world. As we know, the first mass extermination was that of the Native Americans. Today, look at the genocide in Gaza. And it's even prepared, imperialism that is, to sacrifice its own populations. That is what is called exterminism. It started with Ronald Reagan's better dead than red, and is more than ever the order of the day with the Trump administration. That is why Russia and China are being so careful on the world stage to avoid the outbreak of World War III, which would be a nuclear war and cause massive destruction in its wake. Hence the importance of the fight for peace. The priority for the communist movement and more broadly for all progressive forces must be to constitute a front for peace capable of rolling back imperialist aggression. Of course, everyone on the left likes to criticize Trump, but the UK and the EU, especially France and Germany, are, for example, even more aggressive on Ukraine than the US itself. With the military escalation pushed by the Macron, Merz, Starmer, von der Leyen quartet, the prospect of a major East-West confrontation has never been so great. We French must do everything we can to warn people about the sacred union advocated by Macron, which is trying to create a consensus in France in favor of war against Russia. From this point of view, Macron or any centrist or social democratic successor, because he's on his way out, would be just as dangerous as the Rassemblement National, that's the National Front, the far right. The anti-imperialist struggle is different in every country. In some pro-imperialist countries, like the United Kingdom, it is a question of fighting NATO and or subservience to the US in general. In other countries, such as France, it is also necessary to fight one's own imperialist government. The PSCF welcomes the fact that Africa has made huge strides ahead, with French imperialism being kicked out of Western Africa and the French army left with only 2 bases left in Gabon and Djibouti. France favored the occupation by Islamists of the eastern half of Mali in return for the abandonment of Colonel Gaddafi by the Tuaregs, and has turned a blind eye towards terrorist groups that now aim to destabilize progressive regimes in Burkina Faso and Niger. The French army has had to leave Senegal, Chad, and the Central African Republic. The French government also refuses to condemn the M23 terrorists who are attacking Congo. In return, Rwanda, a French ally, France, guards total facilities in Mozambique. The oligarchic governments of France held on to the structures inherited from the colonial period overseas, impoverishing the populations to the point that Martinique and Guadeloupe had to call on Cuban doctors to fight the coronavirus epidemic and feeding separatist temptations. They do not want decolonized sovereign overseas territories, let alone socialist ones. I will conclude by calling on Cuba and Venezuela to stand firm despite the imperialist aggression unleashed on them. Cuba must be free to pursue the path to socialism it has chosen, and Nicolas and Cilia Maduro must be released. I take this opportunity on behalf of the PRCF to salute the heroic struggle of the Palestinian people, without forgetting those of our comrades in Western Sahara, West Papua, Yemen, and Somalia, to name only those who have to face imperialist attacks from abroad. I would also like to thank, once again, this opportunity to thank the platform for organizing this symposium and many others around the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much. From this point onward, we will proceed with a series of prepared written presentations and video presentation, particularly statement in focus and efficient manner. The speaking order will be shared in the chat. Please keep an eye on the chat for updates.
الرفاق الأعزاء المشاركون في المؤتمر الدولي 11 لمكافحة الإمبريالية، تحية أممية. أشكركم جزيل الشكر على توجيه الدعوة لي للمشاركة في أعمال هذا المؤتمر الذي أتمنى له النجاح في جميع أعماله، وأنا واثق بأنه سيشكل إضافة نوعية في مواجهة المخططات الإمبريالية في المنطقة وفي العالم. وأعتذر لعدم تمكني من الحضور لأسباب خارج عن إرادتي، وكنت أتمنى أن أشارك في أعمال مؤتمركم، ولذلك أوجه هذه الرسالة الصوتية لكي أشارك في هذا المؤتمر الذي أتمنى له كل النجاح. تحية لكم جميعا. تواجه القضية الفلسطينية ظروف خطيرة للغاية، وهناك محاولات جادة من قبل التحالف الإمبريالي الصهيوني لتصفية القضية الفلسطينية والحقوق الوطنية الثابتة للشعب الفلسطيني. لكن شعبنا صامد على أرض فلسطين، يقاوم ويقاتل ويقدم التضحيات والدماء منذ قرن من الزمان، ومر على احتلال فلسطين 78 عاما لم يتمكن هذا الاحتلال من تصفية قضيتنا، فشعبنا حي يواصل الكفاح ويواصل المقاومة. وشكلت ملحمة طوفان الأقصى تطور نوعي في كفاح الشعب الفلسطيني وتصديه للاحتلال الصهيوني. ولم تنجح الحركة الصهيونية في تحقيق أهدافها، فقد أقامت استراتيجيتها على شعار أرض بلا شعب لشعب بلا أرض، وسعت إلى نقل يهود العالم إلى فلسطين، إلا أن معظم اليهود لم يهاجروا، وخاصة القسم الأكبر المتواجد في الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية، وبقي أصحاب الأرض الفلسطينيين متجذرين في أرضهم. 7.5 مليون فلسطيني يتواجدون اليوم على أرض فلسطين، و7.5 مليون فلسطيني مشردون في الشتات وفي كل أصقاع العالم. اليوم فإن أكثر ما يقلق القادة الصهاينة، وخاصة بعد ملحمة طوفان الأقصى، هو الهجرة المعاكسة، أي مغادرة عشرات آلاف اليهود الذين يحملون جنسيات أخرى إلى بلدانهم الأصلية. وتشير إحصائيات إسرائيلية إلى أن 25% من سكان الكيان الصهيوني يفكرون في مغادرة أرض فلسطين، وخاصة بعد ملحمة طوفان الأقصى ومعارك الإسناد والملاحم التي خاضتها قوى المقاومة في المنطقة. إن وجود وتشبث 7.5 مليون فلسطيني على أرض فلسطين وضع الكيان الصهيوني أمام مأزق استراتيجي عميق. وفي ظل الهجرة المعاكسة ونسبة تزايد السكان الفلسطينيين على أرض فلسطين مقارنة مع اليهود، جعل الكيان الصهيوني في وضع يفكر فيه إما بترحيل أهلنا الفلسطينيين وتهجيرهم قسرا من أرضهم، أو إبادتهم وقتلهم. وهذا ما مارسه الكيان في قطاع غزة الباسل، مارس عملية تدمير كامل، ومارس سياسة الأرض المحروقة وتدمير البشر والحجر، ويعمل لكي يجعل قطاع غزة مكان غير قابل للحياة. ولكن كل ذلك لم يكسر إرادة شعبنا المتمسك بأرضه ووطنه المقدس، بل جعل الذين خرجوا من القطاع لسبب أو لآخر، للعلاج أو للدراسة، يعودون إلى أرضهم. وهناك الآلاف من أبناء الشعب الفلسطيني يعودون إلى قطاع غزة. وبالتالي فإن مخطط التهجير والإبادة لا يمكن تحقيقه، لأنهم لا يمكن أن يتمكنوا من إبادة 15 مليون فلسطيني. إن حرب الإبادة والتطهير العرقي ومخطط التهجير على مدى الأعوام السابقة كشف أمام الرأي العام العالمي وأمام كل شعوب الأرض، وخاصة أجيال الشباب، زيف وسقوط السردية الصهيونية. واكتشفت شعوب العالم حقيقة وجوهر الكيان الصهيوني وسرديته الزائفة، الذي كان يدعي بأنه واحة الديمقراطية في الشرق الأوسط. وأدرك العالم تصاعد الفاشية والعنصرية والتطرف الديني داخل الكيان الاستعماري الصهيوني، الذي يشكل قاعدة متقدمة للإمبريالية العالمية، وعلى رأسها الإدارة الأمريكية التي تقدم الدعم المطلق وكل أنواع السلاح وأدوات حرب الإبادة ضد الشعب الفلسطيني.
This was the speech from the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine. Next speech will just Russia.
Москва, Совинтерн приветствует участников 11-й антиимпериалистической конференции в Стамбуле. Я считаю, что сегодня наша организация, наши силы, которые мы направляем на защиту интересов наших народов, народов всего мира, которые борются за социальную справедливость, за изменение экономической модели, лежащей в основе политических решений. Все это вместе объединяет нас и создает предпосылки скорой победы. Эта скорая победа, конечно, будет непростой, но именно подобного рода конференции закладывают фундамент этих побед. Мы желаем вам не просто творческой работы, мы желаем вам выработки таких подходов, которые будут понятны людям, объединившимся вокруг нас. Мы хотели бы, чтобы слово, прозвучавшее на 11-й конференции, направленной против империализма во всем мире, было услышано большинством народов мира. Мы желаем всем нам не только побед, но и уверенности в своих силах и дальнейшей консолидации. Успехов в работе вашей конференции.
Dear comrades, I salute you on behalf of the anti-fascist former resistance fighters Netherlands. Marxism teaches us that the number of forms of social relations is ever expanding. As a result, the relations between the social forces are also ever changing. We cannot rely on answers from the past to address questions in the present. Instead, it is our duty to continuously re-examine the structure of social forces in our society. As the raging anti-imperialist world war grows more intense every year, so does the urgency for effective action informed by thorough understanding of the current situation by anti-imperialists. Today, we live in the age of imperialism. Unipolar Atlantic imperialism to be precise. Imperialism, as we understand it, is the international projection of economic relations as imposed by financial capital. It is therefore very important to understand that the struggle against imperialism is class struggle in two different arenas. It is evident that one of these is the struggle of all classes in the liberated countries and the subjugated countries that have an interest in protecting sovereignty. This usually consists of a combination of a progressive nationalist working class, a national bourgeoisie, and sometimes a small peasantry. The other class conflict is internal within imperialist countries. There are fundamental contradictions between the interests of the classes tied to the production-driven economy, the working class and industrial capital, and those of financial capital, which is tied to the credit-driven economy. Imperialism has its influence on this contradiction in a number of ways. First, the imperialist wars in the present era generally disrupt the physical economy and stimulate the speculative credit-based economy. This drives production-connected classes, which are not at all ideologically inclined towards anti-imperialism, into the anti-militarist camp. Our Iranian comrades have made brilliant use of this insight. Through the Islamic Republic's control of the Strait of Hormuz, it has severely intensified this contradiction between international financial capital, which tends to benefit from high oil prices, and national and industrial capital, which suffer from high oil prices. We can see the outcome of this is in the position of nationalist parties in Europe. In the choice between nationalism and Atlanticism, many nationalists choose nationalism and reject military cooperation with the US in attacking Iran. Such interesting shifts in alignment have been heard in Germany, Italy, the Netherlands, and probably more countries. Unfortunately, such developments tend to be dismissed in our circles as cynical or performative. It is a basic truth that contradictions between fractions of capital exist, and it is an observable truth that imperialist war deepen these contradictions. Ultimately, it cannot be determined by exact science to what extent some of these parties serve national capital and to what extent they serve international financial capital, nor is it important. What is important is that we do everything we can to deepen the contradictions between the different fractions of capital. Even if a position is performative, if it brings a party to materially support the right side of a contradiction, this drives the fractions of capital further apart, weakening capitalism as a whole. At the same time, as living standards further decline as a result of the economic fallout of the imperialist wars, more and more people of normal means are pushed into an anti-systemic dissident worldview. Most of these people do not automatically turn to the revolutionary road because there are no revolutionary organizations reaching out to them providing their frustration with structural analysis. They tend to be drawn into worldviews of extreme libertarianism, so-called conspiracy thought, or other such worldviews. Nonetheless, they turn against the right adversary, the liberal capitalist state, and do so for the right reasons: living standards, disillusionments with the fundamental promise of liberal democracy, which is a lie, only using a very shallow understanding and confused terminology. In many instances, the ideological foundation of these people will even be anti-communist, but it is not important. It is not the ideas they espouse we should pay attention to, but the class interests they pursue. Like Stalin pointed out in the Foundations of Leninism, the British Labour Party espoused socialism, but serves imperialism. The merchants of Egypt espoused capitalism, and the Emir of Afghanistan espoused feudal monarchism, but they struggled against imperialism. Obviously, the former did not deserve support of revolutionaries, whereas the latter did. Like Georgy Dimitrov, whose thought is the ideological foundation of our organization, bluntly stated about the anti-fascist struggle, we need not be dismayed, comrades, if people mobilized around these day-to-day interests consider themselves either indifferent to politics or even followers of fascism. The important thing for us is to draw them into the movement, which, although it may not at first proceed openly under the slogans of the struggle against fascism, is already objectively an anti-fascist movement, counterposing the masses against the fascist dictatorship. There is a second way the imperialist wars have influenced the contradiction between international financial capital and all other classes. Financial capital gets its political power through its economic power, and it gets its economic power through imperialist extraction of wealth from periphery countries. Any defeat for imperialism in subjugated or liberated countries weakens political power for international capital domestically. In this way, our struggle for socialism in imperialist countries is not just morally connected to anti-imperialist struggles around the world, but materially. Also for this reason, it is our primary task to defeat imperialism. Defeating imperialism is not only the necessary first step to building socialism for the reason just described, it is also a struggle which itself can bring socialism to victory. Historical examples are plenty. In most, if not all imperialist countries, it is impossible to defeat imperialism with revolutionary forces alone. We are far too weak at this moment. Instead, we must gather all the forces that oppose the imperialist wars for whatever reason and build a popular front against imperialism. Of course, many of the forces in this popular front will not be consistently anti-imperialist. This is to be expected. They represent different class interests and have shallower understanding of the situation than us. Instead of using this as an excuse to be cynical and declare the effort futile, we are to use the practical work of organizing against some imperialist wars to educate these political forces and, importantly, their popular base about the interconnectedness of individual wars, imperialism, international financial capital, other wars, and class interest and class struggle in the imperialist home country. This requires us to thoroughly study and understand the class interests of other political forces, not to reduce them to a caricature as is too often the habit among people in our camp. Even if this effort ultimately fails in the short term, it will still help build and strengthen the position of the revolutionary forces. Through building this popular front, our forces are positioned to lead it and provide it with structural analysis other forces lack, and to prove through our actions to the masses who support nationalist parties that their instinct is correct, asserting national interest in the face of imperialist, so-called globalist dominance, but that the only way to make true on this promise is to wage class struggle against financial capital and ultimately build socialism. The only true nationalism is socialism. The only true socialism is progressive nationalism, patriotism. All imperialist countries have proud elements of revolutionary heroes and progressive struggles. These heroes and these struggles belong to the people, not to the bankers. This must be our understanding in building and leading anti-imperialist popular fronts throughout the imperialist countries, allied to our comrades in the heat of the struggle against imperialism, in liberated countries such as Russia, Iran, the Alliance of Sahel states, and countries struggling for liberation such as Palestine. Down with imperialism. Long live the struggle against imperialism. Long live the progressive struggles of all peoples of the world.
Next speech is from the September 23rd movement, Bulgaria.
Dear comrades, first and foremost, I would like to extend our warmest greetings to our comrades participating in the international events in Istanbul organized against the NATO's policies and against yet another summit of this military political alliance. These initiatives demonstrate that despite the immense propaganda machine of the imperialists and their servants, there are forces that continue consistently to oppose the imperialist aggression. The main striking force of modern imperialism is the United States and NATO, which in the recent decades repeatedly demonstrated willingness to use military force, economic pressure and political intervention to protect their interests of their national capital. Just recall the 1999 bombing of Yugoslavia carried out without the UN Security Council authorization. Under the pretext of protecting human rights, a sovereign state was destroyed. Infrastructure, factories, hospitals and homes were destroyed and thousands of people lost their lives. These aggressions remains in the minds of the people in the Balkans as one of the most striking manifestations of modern imperialism since the end of the Cold War. A similar fate awaited Iraq. Following the military intervention, justified by claims of weapons of mass destruction that were never found, the country was thrown into a long-lasting chaos. Hundreds of thousands died, millions were forced to flee their homes, and one of the most developed countries in the Middle East was turned into an arena of the constant conflict. Libya also became an example of the devastating consequences of the imperialist intervention. The country, which had previously held leading position in social indications across Africa, was subjugated to a NATO military operations, after which the state effectively collapsed and the population was condemned to instability, poverty and armed clashes. For years, Syria has been subjected to external pressure, sanctions and various forms of intervention. The most reactionary forces were organized and armed just so that the regime in that country could be overthrown and Western corporations could get their hands on its resources. After decades of provocations, sanctions and terrorist attacks, On 3rd of January 2026, a brutal attack was carried out against Venezuela. Dozens of people were killed, the president and his wife were kidnapped. In front of the whole world, the genocide against the Palestinian people continues. Their heroic resistance stands up against some of the most powerful forces in the world. The economic blockade against Cuba has been in place for more than 6 decades. This policy caused serious damage to the country's development and the daily lives of millions of Cubans. In addition to sanctions and open interventions, in the recent decades, imperialism has mastered the use of so-called color revolutions to overthrow the inconvenient governments, which also represents a form of imperialist aggression. The most striking example of this is Ukraine, where the government was overthrown after a decade of the Western funding of neo-Nazi organizations, which became key instrument of the 2014 coup and led the country into the bloody civil war and later in the open war against Russia. As the general crisis of capitalism intensifies, it is natural to expect new manifestations of imperialist aggression. All these processes have not baptized Bulgaria. Following the restoration of capitalism in 1989, our country became a raw material appendage of Western corporations. Bulgaria was integrated into the structures of imperialism, which in the recent years had been significant due to our country's geographical position in the context of the planned full-scale war against the Russian Federation. The Bulgarian people were never asked in any form whether they wanted the country to become a member of NATO. This decision was made by the political elite without any consultation with the people. As a result, Bulgaria was drawn into the military political structures and conflicts that not serve the interest of the Bulgarian working people. In the recent years, we have witnessed the deployment of the increasing amounts of military equipment and forces on the country's territory. Regardless of the political explanations, a significant part of the public views this process as involving Bulgaria in the global conflicts and as a limitation of the national sovereignty. Dozens of US military warcrafts were stationed in our largest airport, and the airport itself had to be closed for a period of 24 hours. At the same time, we are witnessing a growing public discontent with the policy of the ruling circles. Protests against the introduction of the euro, dissatisfaction with the Bulgarians' participation in the military initiatives, and the growing criticisms of NATO and the European Union indicate that significant processes of the political rethinking are underway in the society. 15 years ago, the positions we advocated, that Bulgaria should leave NATO, that it should follow to independent foreign policy and oppose the American hegemony, were marginalized and largely absent from the public sphere. Today, such issues are already being discussed openly, not only among the activists, but also in the media, in public debates, and even in the parliamentary circles. This shows that the tensions existing in society over these issues cannot longer be ignored. For countries like Bulgaria, which have a dependent position in the International Division of Labor, and are tied into external political and economic powers, the struggle for socialism inevitably includes an element of national liberation. The defense of national sovereignty, economic independence, and the people's right to determine their own destiny become an integral part of the social struggle. People's patriotism in no way contradicts the proletarian internationalism. To defend their conquest after 1989, however, the capitalists do not waste time or energy. In order to weaken the popular movement against Bulgaria's participation in the imperialist wars and for withdrawal from the imperialist alliances, the ruling class turns to the most tasted weapon for this purpose: fascism. This is supported by the process of historical revisionism and the rehabilitation of reactionary political traditions from the past. A striking example is the events that took place on the 9th of May 2026, when the young anti-fascists were attacked during the commemoration of the Victory Day over fascism. Among the victims were members of the September 23 movement. This attack also is a response to the intensifying activity and the successes of our organization in exposing imperialism and spreading communist ideas. Such events, however, do not arise in a vacuum. They are a result of decades of policy of rewriting historical memory, in which anti-fascist struggle devaluated and specific aspects of the period before 1944 are presented in a positive light. Following the restoration of capitalism, a significant portion of the political and intellectual elite has been striving to present the socialist period as a historical deviation and the capitalist transformation as a transformation to return to normality. This interpretation serves as a justification for the privatization, social polarization, and looting of public wealth carried out during the years of so-called transition to democracy. Today, capitalism is a global system. Therefore, a successful struggle against it must be inevitably a result of a coordinated action of the people around the world. It is necessary to strengthen the anti-imperialist forces, both locally and internationally. Imperialism must be defeated, and it will be defeated. NATO must be defeated and disbanded. Only through organized resistance, international solidarity, and consistent struggle against imperialism, we can build a world of workers' power as a first step through a society free from exploitation of man by man. Down with imperialism. The people united will never be defeated. Disband NATO.
Next will be the Communist Party of Popular Unity from Italy.
Dear comrades, as the Communist Party of Popular Unity, Italy, we are particularly glad, even if remotely, to contribute to the developments of this important 11th International Anti-Imperialist Conference in Istanbul, which represents a fundamental step in the consolidation of the World Anti-Imperialist Platform. We enthusiastically welcome the development of the World Anti-Imperialist Youth Platform, the holding of the second conference of the World Anti-Imperialist Women's Platform, and the establishment of the World Anti-Imperialist Workers Platform. We consider these the successes of the utmost importance. In Italy, as throughout the world, it's increasingly clear that social and democratic struggle on the one hand, and the struggle against imperialism and war on the other, are two sides of the same coin, two aspects of the same struggle. These are not sectoral initiatives, but a common movement of a struggle that finds its fundamental motivation in the aggressive and oppressive path of imperialism, which is the capitalism of our time, dominated by the financial capital, the dominant role of monopolies, the race for the ever-increasing accumulation of profits and concentration of power, and the ever more shameless exploitation of workers. If by its intrinsic characteristics capitalism brings war like clouds bring storms, it's even more true that today, in the age of its structural and systemic crisis and its loss of centrality and hegemony at global level, imperialism resorts to the war to address its crisis, to find new opportunities for accumulation and new markets to colonize, and to impose through war new forms of domination without hegemony but with the military power. Capital needs war to counter its own crisis, since war allows the destruction of a fixed capital, structures and infrastructures, machines and production apparatus, and variable capital, the proletariat and productive subjects, and therefore permits reconstruction, the regeneration of a productive capital, the replacement of all with a new capital, and the capitalistic command over new productive subjects. The crisis of imperialism and the oligarchy agenda of global domination and control unleash war and put peoples against each other. They seek to conceal the class nature of the crisis and rely on war to impose a new configuration of the world. The crisis of capitalism is at the same time an economic, social, and even moral, spiritual, and civilization crisis, and risks bringing with it the collapse of human civilization and the abyss of morality in terms of loss of values, social disintegration, genocide, as the genocide of the Palestinian people tragically demonstrates. In this scenario, the present time technological applications and the most recent developments in artificial intelligence, along with the concentration of productive factors under capitalism, do not advance democracy, but rather the concentration of property, the capitalistic accumulation, and the power of imperialism and war. In the capitalistic West, technological innovation is increasingly subservient to the accumulation and concentration of wealth, the interests of oligarchies and monopolies, increasing social hierarchies, and serving as a tool to strengthen imperialism's war machine. This undermines the foundation of democracy itself, destroys the possibility of a welfare state, and fuels war as a technological and military system, as the aggression against Russia in Ukraine and in alliance with Israel against Iran have demonstrated. This requires a struggle for a non-capitalistic appropriation and management of the products and outcomes of technological innovation, with the aim of placing technological development at the service of people's lives. The external front, the war unleashed by imperialism against the freedom and sovereignty of peoples, and the internal front, the anti-popular measures, censorships, and closures, and repression against the struggles of workers and popular masses, are therefore more and more intrinsically linked. In this mad rush to hoard resources, maximize profits, and concentrate wealth, imperialism exacerbates social divisions, production exploitation, and social hierarchies, and increasingly threatens formal liberal democracy itself, which it increasingly sees as an obstacle to its goals. Workers' living conditions are increasingly unbearable. In Italy, 6 million people, the 10% of the entire population, live in absolute poverty. More than 10% of workers are in poverty. Italy is the only so-called advanced economy where for over 30 years, real wages have remained stagnant. At the same time, overall military spending is estimated at around 45 billion euros, equal to 2% of GDP, And Italy has also signed the pact with the European Union and NATO to increase military spending to 5% of GDP by 2035, which means an additional 80 billion euro per year. As a direct consequence of imperialistic aggression against Russia and Iran, the cost of living for workers have become unbearable. The price increase in the Eurozone amounted to 3.6%, energy cost increased by 11%. In Italy, more than 70 industrial crises and failures are in this moment underway. The entire system is undergoing the industrialization and the production dismantling, accelerated by the effects of the war and the consequent energy cost rise. At the same time, social spending has declined in real terms and is facing continuous reductions, not only in social welfare, but also in education and healthcare. From both an economic and democratic perspective, the role of the European Union and NATO and Italy's continued membership in NATO and the European Union represent a real cage that prevents the country from developing its own policies consistent with its true interests. It affects workers, dismantles the productive system, destroys the welfare state, makes the cost of living unsustainable, and places a heavy burden on democracy. Faced with their own crisis, and with Italy and the European Union fully involved in imperialistic wars, particularly the war against Russia in Ukraine, war propaganda and narratives become increasingly relentless, and the manipulation of history becomes one of the tools of hybrid warfare, as well as a tool to delegitimize the social and democratic achievements of the labor movement. A clear indicator of the European Union's standing is the approval of the 2019 European Parliament resolution on the importance of a European remembrance for the future of Europe, which shamefully equates, in terms of historical responsibility, oppressors and liberators, the Nazi tyranny and the great liberation and emancipation movement embodied by Soviet socialism. Once again, fascism in times of war confirms itself as an instrument of power to pursue its own goals of domination. The European Union defines itself in its documents as a complementary and interoperable with NATO. In Europe, therefore, the fight against NATO cannot be conducted fully and effectively unless being a fight against the European Union, which is responsible with its budgetary rules for the reduction of wages, salaries, and pensions, for the systematic cuts to welfare, and for the continued war expenditure. On the Ukrainian front alone, the European Union has spent over 200 billion euros of European citizens' money and has already launched over 20 packages of anti-Russia unilateral coercive measures, another front in the European Union aggressive and counterproductive economic war. And we cannot ignore, with regard to NATO, the impact, the very deep impact of the presence in Italy of over 120 US and NATO military bases and installations, with over 12,000 US troops on the ground, an occupation army. We are convinced, comrades, that in a global context marked by a third world war, fought on the most diverse theaters in the world today, the anti-imperialist struggle of workers and the popular masses is a decisive and promising factor in defending social rights and social justice, defending democracy, overthrowing imperialism, and building peace with effective democracy and social justice. Long live the World Anti-Imperialist Platform, long live the workers and people's movement, long live the 21st century socialism.
Next will be the No to NATO from Workers' Party of Britain.
Dear friends at the World Anti-Imperialist Platform, it is an immense privilege for me to give greetings on behalf of the Workers' Party of Britain and No to NATO. It is vitally important that Britain is represented in the global anti-imperialist movement, as we are one of the main purveyors of imperialist aggression worldwide. It is Britain that is at the helm of this so-called coalition of the willing, of Britain, France, Germany, and Ukraine in its proxy war against Russia. Just recently, we had our Minister of Defence, John Healey, resign from his post following a dispute between himself and Keir Starmer that defence spending is not being sufficiently increased. But it is defence spending that has seen the biggest increase than any other possible outlet of state spending in Britain. This means that all other sectors of British society are suffering: healthcare, education and housing. So it is very clear that Britain's involvement in imperialist aggression impacts not only the peoples of the global East and the global South, but fundamentally it impacts people here at home. Mass migration is the biggest point of political discourse in Britain, and it is a phenomenon that exists solely because of an imperialist global system of forced wealth transfer from the global South and the global East to a handful of imperialist nations. But is it going to the nations collectively? No. It goes to financial oligarchs, big companies, and the military-industrial complex that is being inflated by taxpayers' money. These are the people who are enjoying the biggest bonanza from our involvement in imperialist wars abroad. So it is vitally important that Britain plays its role in the anti-imperialist movement, that British workers are connected and organised to undermine and weaken the imperialist front at home. We have an important role behind enemy lines and we seek to fulfill that role. There is precedence to British workers organising to undermine the war machine. After the Bolshevik Revolution of 1917, Winston Churchill implored the ruling class of Britain to strangle the baby in its cradle. And to this effect, the British Armed Forces geared up the Jolly George to be sent to Russia to arm the treacherous reactionary White Army with the full support of America, Canada, and the other imperialist nations of Europe to crush the revolution before it built socialism in Russia. But it was organised British workers that refused to arm the Jolly George, and the project was abandoned completely. Workers, both behind enemy lines and on the front lines of imperialism, have the power to end imperialism. And that is a key feature that must be conveyed in the World Anti-Imperialist Forum. So dear friends, I wish you a fruitful Congress. I hope lots of practical points will be made and that a new plan of work over the next coming years will be made, because we need your work now more than ever. Solidarity, comrades.
Now we will proceed with the written speech. The written speech will also proceed speedily.
A speech from the DPRK International Youth Friendship League. Comrades of the World Anti-Imperialist Platform. We meet in Istanbul as a united front against NATO, the US empire, and all the puppet forces supporting deadly sanctions, mass murder, and reactionary ideologies. Today, I would like to address three key issues: the vulnerabilities of Cuba and Venezuela, including the capture of Nicolas Maduro and the worsening economic crisis on the island nation. Why the Venezuelan people did not rise up meaningfully after US aggression, and what the Democratic People's Republic of Korea experience teaches us about not only surviving, but also developing under the blows of the empire. Speaking of the lessons taught by the People's Korea, in the 1990s, the country entered the arduous march period after losing its main trade partners and suffering from multiple natural disasters. Instead of opening to IMF or abandoning the socialist path, Korea launched the Sungun military-first policy, transforming the economic system into a state of struggle. We clearly see now that all these sacrifices were worth it, as now the DPRK not only has food security and a mostly self-reliant economy, but also develops substantial social, industrial, regional, and infrastructural projects. Furthermore, the greatest gift of Kim Jong-il's Sungun policy to the country was the nuclear weapon, saving the DPRK from the fates of Iraq, Libya, and Yugoslavia. For imperialism threatened nation, going nuclear is not aggression, it's insurance against an imminent invasion. When Trump threatens Cuba, it calls for dialogue. When Trump threatened Korea in 2017, Pyongyang tested a missile over Japan and only then offered room for cautious conditional negotiations. The DPRK may sit down with imperialism to secure better conditions for its people, but never trade their nuclear program for unenforceable promises. Comrades, the deadly grip of imperialism is tightening, but we help it when we refuse to criticize our own side. The DPRK is not perfect, but their method is correct. Independence in politics, self-reliance in economy, and defense is a non-negotiable right. Let's honor Cuba and Venezuela by comradely criticism, and may the peoples of the world study the Juche idea to better lead the struggle against imperialism, hegemony, and reactionary forces. Next speech from the DPRK International Solidarity Group, Russia. We live in difficult times when US imperialism and its satellites, faced with an insoluble internal crisis and the loss of global hegemony, have unleashed an aggression that has already engulfed Eastern Europe. The world is burning, and in this flame, an age-old truth is becoming crystal clear. A people without genuine independence inevitably falls victim. Today, when imperialism is trying to deprive peoples of the right to independence, to subordinate them to the rule of transnational capital, and turn them into cannon fodder for its wars, the significance of self-reliance only increases. Why is the role of the DPRK so important in the anti-imperialist struggle? The point is that under the proven leadership of the respected Comrade Kim Jong-un, it has become the most consistent embodiment of the principle of self-reliance. The political independence of the DPRK is manifested in the fact that it never yields to the domination of the great powers, does not bow to threats, and does not sell its sovereignty. Economic self-reliance has made it possible, even under the harshest sanctions, to build a socialist economy that guarantees free education, free healthcare, and a dignified life for all citizens. Self-reliance in defense has turned the DPRK into a powerful nuclear power armed with hydrogen bombs and hypersonic weapons. The signing in June 2024 of the historic Treaty on Comprehensive Strategic Partnership with Russia revived allied relations for surpassing those that existed between the Soviet Union and the DPRK in 1961. The unbreakable ties with China, sealed by the Treaty of Comrade Kim Il-sung and Comrade Zhou Enlai, and confirmed at the highest level in 2019, remain invariably strong. Today, the World Anti-Imperialist Platform, uniting some 80 parties and organizations and waging an irreconcilable struggle not only against imperialist aggression, but also against opportunism and revisionism within the workers' movement, is assuming precisely this role. The platform is becoming the locomotive that gathers together that scattered detachments of anti-imperialists and develops a unified strategy and tactics, exposes pseudo-left theories such as the so-called imperialist pyramid, and mobilizes the masses for the decisive battle. At the heart of this strategy, in our view, should lie the principle of self-reliance. For only a party armed with the idea of self-reliance, only a people conscious of being the masters of their own destiny can triumph in the anti-imperialist war. History has taught us a costly lesson. The First World War led to the victory of the October Revolution. The Second World War ended with the formation of the world socialist system. And the Third World War, which is an anti-imperialist war, must inevitably end with the final collapse of imperialism and the advent of an era when the peoples of the whole world will become the true masters of their own destiny. There is no doubt that the World Anti-Imperialist Platform, the Comintern of the 21st century, is rallying progressive humanity in this struggle. Thank you. Next speech from Communist Party of Belgium. The imperialist United States has launched a war against Iran, which immediately developed into a large-scale armed military conflict across West Asia, The war in West Asia, in turn, is accelerating the outbreak of a war in East Asia, marking the large-scale escalation of the Third World War. The Trump faction has now become the principal war criminal force responsible for accelerating the full-scale arrival of the Third World War through imperialist wars of aggression. American chauvinists have now been exposed as unprecedented fascists. The theaters of operation extend across West Asia, East Asia, Eastern Europe, and Central America. These regions constitute the principal battlefields of the Third World War. The imperialist camp has committed a fatal error by opening multiple theaters simultaneously while failing to secure victory in even a single one of them. Faced with the collapse of its global hegemony and deepening political and economic crisis, the imperialist bloc has provoked the Third World War. Yet this fatal mistake has only accelerated its ultimate downfall. Those who pay with the fire will perish by fire. The imperialist camp cannot prevail in any of the four major theaters. A united people will never be defeated. The final victory in this Third World War belongs to the anti-imperialist camp. What about Turkey's ambiguous foreign policy? Turkey occupies a complex position in international affairs, serving simultaneously as a member of NATO and as a regional power, pursuing its own strategic ambitions. The country has been a member of NATO since 1952 and played a crucial role as the alliance's southeastern flank against the Soviet Union during the Cold War. It contributed a large military force and significant military infrastructure, including NATO bases such as Incirlik, which continue to play an important role in operations throughout the Middle East. Today, Turkey seeks to navigate these competing interests as a NATO member. It remains part of the Western Alliance, yet it simultaneously pursues an independent and often pragmatic regional strategy. In its relations with both Israel and Iran, Ankara generally favors caution over direct confrontation. Although Erdogan consistently voices support for the Palestine cause in his public rhetoric, Turkey continues to maintain trade relations with Israel. Thank you. And the next speech from Mazdoor Kissan Party, Pakistan. Turkey is hosting the annual NATO summit. This gathering represents more than just a bureaucratic milestone for the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. It serves as a stark symbol of the opportunistic, militaristic alignments shifting across the Middle East and its periphery. In recent years, several regional actors, most notably Turkey, but also key states across the Gulf and the broader Middle East, have doubled down on militarism. They have expanded domestic defense capabilities, intervened in protracted regional conflicts like Syria, and aggressively integrated themselves into Western-led defense frameworks. Yet, this entire paradigm rests on a dangerous delusion, which is that these alliances will deliver a secure and prosperous future for the Middle East and the broader region. They will not. For Europe, Turkey is valued almost exclusively as a geopolitical buffer zone, the southern flank against Russia, a migrant holding facility, and a choke point controlling the strategic Bosphorus Strait. To understand the long-term cost of this dependency, one only needs to look at the sheer devastation wrought upon the Middle East by past conflicts by NATO members. The Iraq War, the bombardments of Libya, and proxy war in Syria unleashed years of sectarian bloodletting, terrorism, and caused hundreds of thousands of civilian deaths all over the region, throwing the natural development of the region completely off course. Their role in the genocide of the Palestinians will never be forgotten, and we will be analyzing and dealing with the historic disruption and shift from the Iran war for years to come. These wars, sold under the guise of delivering global stability, systematically destroyed the Middle East. When regional powers willfully align with the very imperialists that brought about these catastrophes, they choose to become accomplices in the destabilization of their own neighborhoods. Security and prosperity for the Middle East cannot be imported via foreign weapons, nor can they be achieved by participating in extra-regional proxy struggles. Peace is the only viable path. On the infamous occasion of the NATO summit this year, the people of Turkey must reject the alliance and choose peace. Down with NATO, down its imperialism. Thank you.
The next speech is from Zimbabwe Movement of Pan-African Socialists. World War III and the Rise of the World Anti-Imperialist Front, an African call to resistance. As the world gathers in Istanbul for the 11th International Anti-Imperialist Conference of the World Anti-Imperialist Platform, humanity stands at a dangerous crossroads. The threat of World War III is no longer a distant possibility. It is becoming a reality driven by the aggressive actions of the imperialist powers led by the United States and NATO. From West Asia to East Asia, from Eastern Europe to Latin America, the forces of imperialism are pushing humanity towards a catastrophic global conflict. The current war against Iran represents a new and dangerous phase of imperialist aggression. Iran has become a target because it refuses to submit to Western dictates, and because it supports the axis of resistance against Zionist occupation and imperialist domination in West Asia. The attacks against Iran are not merely attacks on one nation. They are attacks on the principle of sovereignty and the right of nations to determine their own destiny. The Zionist state, backed by the United States and its allies, continues to wage war against the Palestinian people and threatens the entire region. The genocide in Gaza, the attacks on Lebanon, Syria, and now Iran reveal the true face of modern imperialism. It is a system willing to sacrifice millions of lives to preserve its global hegemony. At the same time, NATO is expanding far beyond its original boundaries. What was once an Atlantic military alliance is now being transformed into a global instrument of aggression. The pacification of NATO, aimed at encircling China and provoking conflict in East Asia, threatens to open a new front in an already unstable world. The possibility of war in the Taiwan Strait, combined with ongoing tensions in Korea and the South China Sea, could ignite a conflict of unimaginable proportions. Meanwhile, the war in Eastern Europe continues to escalate. NATO's eastward expansion and its confrontation with Russia have increased the danger of wider European war. In Latin America, the growing tensions around Cuba and the emergence of what many describe as a second Cuban Missile Crisis demonstrate that imperialism is also preparing new confrontations in the Western Hemisphere. The risk of conflict spreading into Central America remains real. Against this imperialist camp stands the growing anti-imperialist camp. This camp includes nations, movements, and peoples struggling for sovereignty, independence, and self-reliance. It includes the Palestinian resistance, the axis of resistance, Cuba, Venezuela, the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, progressive forces across Africa, Asia, and Latin America, and all those who refuse to submit to imperialist domination. The answer to the growing threat of World War III lies in strengthening the anti-war movement and building people's resistance. Workers, peasants, students, women, youth, and progressive intellectuals must organize themselves into strong mass organizations capable of resisting imperialist influence. The class struggle remains central to the fight against imperialism because the same system that exploits workers at home also exploits nations abroad. National liberation and class liberation must advance together. Political independence without economic liberation remains incomplete. Likewise, social transformation cannot succeed without defeating imperialist domination. The ideological struggle is equally important. Imperialism wages war not only with bombs and missiles, but also through media manipulation, cultural domination, and information warfare. The anti-imperialist movement must strengthen political education, revolutionary consciousness, and international solidarity. The communist movement and all revolutionary forces have a critical role to play in exposing imperialist propaganda and mobilizing the masses. The World Anti-Imperialist Platform has emerged as an important instrument for building global resistance. At this critical moment, its strengthening is essential. It must continue to unite anti-imperialist forces, coordinate international solidarity, and provide political leadership in the struggle against war and imperialism. From Africa, we declare that the future belongs not to NATO, imperialism, or Zionism. The future belongs to the people who resist. The future belongs to national liberation, social justice, and international solidarity. The future belongs to the World Anti-Imperialist Front. Thank you. The next speech is from Communist Party Marxist Kenya. Escalation of World War III and the Anti-Imperialist Front. There have been different categories of war in the world. There are just wars that have helped advance the progress of the people, and there are also unjust wars that have sought to maintain the status quo or reverse any progress. Modern wars, especially World War I and World War II, represent the crisis of the primitive accumulation of capital. One cannot understand these wars without a clear understanding of the laws of the development of imperialism in the world. To understand imperialism requires us to look at its historical development. We must also differentiate between mercantilist imperialism and modern imperialism as developed by Lenin. World War III. World War III is happening right on our eyes, but it has not reached the stage of generalized war. Just as the first and the second, it is a manifestation of the economic crisis. World War III will not be a single event. It has already begun, and we have to do something. The US and its subordinate Western allies have prepared their military-industrial complex in NATO and private to treat the world to another world war and to pacify the economic crisis of capitalism. In East Asia, the US and its European allies have continued to use Taiwan as its proxy ground against China. In the Korean Peninsula, South Korea has become the proxy ground against the DPRK. The joint US-South Korea military operation is not just about containment, but a preparation for an all-out war against the sovereignty of the DPRK. The situation in Southwest Asia is worse. Palestine, which has faced apartheid under the settler colonial regime of Israel for over 75 years, have been subjected to ethnic cleansing, sanctions, and artificial hunger by the genocidal Israel settler colonial state. Following the US-sanctioned overthrow of Bashar al-Assad, the US Zionist axis has carried out its expansionist agenda by annexing more territories in Syria. Iran is now facing open aggression from the US, despite its commitment to the 2025 Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action with the Obama administration, and which was later re-signed by Trump in 2020. We continue to support the liberation struggle of Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas in Palestine, Ansar Allah in Yemen, the Islamic Resistance Forces in Iraq. These are not terrorist groups, as imperialism would want us to believe. They are national liberation movements, and the imperialist forces call them terrorists, just like they called the Mau Mau terrorists. In Latin America, under the Monroe Doctrine, US imperialism continues to suppress the socialist projects in Cuba and Venezuela. The recent capture of comrades Nicolas Maduro and his wife Celia Flores was an act of infringement on the people of Venezuela. The US has escalated its 65 years blockade against Cuba to total blockade against Cuba. This had led to a lack of access to basic commodities in Cuba. The US has said that the invasion of Cuba is in the offing. In Eastern Europe, despite NATO proposing not to continue expanding in the Eastern Bloc, the US-EU NATO axis orchestrated a coup in Ukraine in 2014 and installed the neo-Nazi puppet government of Zelensky, which has continued to suppress the struggle of the people of Donetsk and Lugansk. This threat of neo-Nazis is not just for Russia, but for the whole world. The people of Russia, just like during the Great Patriotic War, continue to win decisive victories against the US-EU NATO alliance. Here in Africa, the US and France have continues to suppress the recent revolutions in sub-Saharan Africa. Through AFRICOM, they have continued to fund terrorist groups and impose sanctions through ECOWAS. The countries of the Sahelian states, that is Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, are trying to break away from imperial chain, and they are trying to assert their independence. The fundamental contradictions and prospects for anti-imperialist struggle. As we have seen above, comrades, the major contradictions in the world remain between monopoly capital and labor, to the inter-imperialist contradiction between imperialist powers for world hegemony and different spheres of influence. 3. The contradiction between oppressed nations against imperialism and local reaction. The era of bourgeoisie democratic revolution is over. We have now entered the era of bourgeoisie democratic revolution of a new type, that is the national democratic revolution with a socialist perspective. For nations that are still oppressed by imperialism and where industrialization has been impeded and pre-capitalist relations remain, the national democratic revolution remains the most direct route to socialist construction. We must continue to build both bilateral and multilateral relations within our different organizations to consolidate an international united front that will help defeat imperialism. The only answer is proletarian revolution. The next speech is from Coordinator of Eastern Communities, El Salvador. We are facing the decline of imperialism. For our peoples, this year is already a negative historical milestone. While the media broadcasts sporting events, a dark reality is imposing itself on Latin America with the advance of imperialism and the imposition of fascist and authoritarian governments. The year 2026 was inaugurated with the military aggression against Venezuela, the kidnapping of its president, and the continuous blackmail against the Bolivarian government. It closes for June with the fraudulent elections in Peru and Colombia, in which the direct interventions of the US, the manipulation of digital vote counting programs, and vote buying principally abroad are actions that are completely and with the utmost cynicism ignored. And on the contrary, backed by the massive media and corporate conglomerates. The situation suppresses all limits of international law with the blockade and the threat of armed intervention against heroic Cuban revolution. The resistance and struggle of the peoples are present. Cuba, Bolivia, Peru, and Colombia are developing a tenacious resistance at this moment, to which the solidarity and resistance of the rest of our Latin America peoples and the world must be urgently added. Starting from the more global context, we have witnessed a new defeat of imperialism in the geopolitical war, a military defeat within a comparatively brief period against Iran, a nation that imperialism totally undervalued a few months or even days ago. The effect of the military disaster is not yet fully appreciated, but it already has passed. It has great resonances, especially among the power groups of the Zionist lobby and the sectors seeking to evade the impact of a major debacle. The latter recognize the strategic disadvantage in US public opinion, which mostly manifests its position of no to war, and the electoral impact that will result in the rejection of warmongering positions in the upcoming November elections. In the economic order, during the last month, we have observed how both the government and the financial authorities of the USA have decided to cast off from one of the pillars of the FED, unleashing the containment of inflation, which means that impact of the continuous crisis will fall with greater intensity upon the labor sectors and the middle class, thus replicating in the economy a phenomenon that has developed in the terrain of security. The powerful build shelters designed to survive even nuclear attacks and do not worry at all about the fate of the majority of the population. The three previous aspects are very limited list of quantity of weaknesses and contradictions that imperialism faces. But they are sufficient in this brief reflection to understand the nature and capacity of the intervention in our America. It has correctly pointed out by many comrades that the economic crisis and the military defeat of imperialism have led them to restrict within the continent, expressed in their national security strategy of 2024, as well as in the more blatant manner in the words of the former head of the Southern Command, Laura Richardson, when she expressed that the resources of Latin America belong to the United States. Thus, we arrive at the constitution of the hemispheric alliance of the Shield of the Americas, an alliance constituted by the countries whose governments are the most lackey ultra-right governments of an authoritarian or fascist character, whose commitment declared aloud by them is the surrender of the resources and strategy, infrastructure of the region, and of the control of security policy to the USA. All this allows us to anger that for Latin America countries, only a greater spoliation awaits, and from their governments, an increasingly brutal repression. But the experience also points out that the greater the repression, the greater the struggle. It is urgent then that each political and social actor positioning themselves on the side of the pueblo establish their own strategy and prepares the condition to do fully what they consider their duty. The platform must constitute itself as a base for this discussion and the development of this task. The next speech is from the Communist Party of the Russian Federation. To the participants of the 11th International Anti-Imperialist Conference, dear comrades, the International Department of the CPRF congratulates the guests and participants of the World Anti-Imperialist Platform Conference. We highly appreciate your initiative aimed at bringing together all progressive forces worldwide to oppose the attempts of global imperialism to dominate in all spheres of economic and politics. Peoples all over the world must know the truth and estimate the danger of imperialist essence, which leads to fascism rebirth amid aggravation of social conflicts and frantic attempts of the USA and West to conquer the whole world. The CPRF expresses its solidarity with your fight. Today, our joint efforts are required more than ever. We appreciate them and pay tribute to your contribution in that noble mission. We wish all success to your conference and look for close cooperation. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your all efforts, and thank you for all written contribution. Now we invite the comrades from Solidarity Statement for Anti-Imperialist Youth from the founding member of the Revolutionary Theory Group from Greece.
Good evening, comrades. Greetings from China. I am from Greece, of course, but I am in China. It is not in the best circumstances that we are meeting today, but nevertheless, I'm glad to be among you, even online. So, on behalf of the Initiative for the World Anti-Imperialist Platform of the Revolutionary Theory Group, I want to express our solidarity with the comrades detained by the Turkish authorities and with all struggling people around the world. We oppose the fascist repression of the movement. The anti-imperialist youth arrested by the Turkish regime must be released immediately. On the morning of July 1st, Turkish police raided the camp where the World Anti-Imperialist Youth Platform Conference was taking place. Approximately 20 members of the international delegation of the World Anti-Imperialist Youth Platform, as well as Turkish youth activists, were violently detained by the authorities and remain in custody. The violent repression and arrests targeting representatives of the World Anti-Imperialist Platform began in May in Kenya and are now continuing in Turkey. Both Kenya and Turkey are strategically important countries for imperialism and colonialism. The NATO summit is due to take place in Ankara on 7 and 8 July. The main issue to be addressed at the summit is the transition of all NATO and European Union countries and their allies to a war economy in order to increase their direct involvement in aggressive warfare. This will be accompanied by a significant increase in military spending and a greater involvement in the production of weapon systems and ammunition, as well as more direct operational involvement on the Ukrainian front and all other potential and active fronts. Tensions are running high around the Russian exclave of Kaliningrad, Belarus, and the so-called Baltic republics. Romania, a NATO member, is initiating procedures to annex Moldova, a move that brings the alliance's aggressive actions against the Autonomous Republic of Transnistria one step closer. There, vast stockpiles of Soviet-era weapon systems and ammunition are stored. Meanwhile, tensions in Transcaucasia are also on the rise with the all-out operational NATOization of Armenia and Azerbaijan and the activation of the strategically important Zanzur corridor. The primary objective is to disrupt the infrastructure of China's Belt and Road Initiative and to sever ties between Iran, Russia, and China. All of this is taking place at a time when the conflict with Iran, with fronts ablaze in Lebanon, Palestine, and Yemen, appears to be an attempt by imperialism to buy time to launch its next attacks. It is important to note that Greece and Turkey are strategically significant as they host a large number of bases and NATO facilities. Greece hosts at least 33 US and NATO bases and military installations. Greece recently participated in joint exercises with France and Canada in Armenia, Operation Eagle Partner 2026, 17th to 25 June 2026, with Russia being the obvious target. All of the above indicates that as the war escalates, so too will a transnational fascist-style network of repression against every internationalist and anti-imperialist initiative and movement. This is evident from the arrests in Kenya and Turkey. In Turkey, the focus of the repression has shifted towards youth activists from the World Anti-Imperialist Youth Platform. It is vital that we build an internationalist anti-imperialist solidarity movement to demand the immediate and unconditional release of our comrades. We'll link this movement to the struggle of our peoples, especially the Greek people, to close and expel the US NATO bases, which are turning the country and its people into targets for retaliatory strikes in this unjust war waged by the Axis. We called for immediate withdrawal from NATO, the EU, and all other transnational imperialist organizations. Long live the World Anti-Imperialist Platform. Defeat and destruction of the forces of imperialism. Victory to the forces of anti-imperialism and socialism. Thank you, comrades.
Thank you, comrades. Now we proceed to the speech of coordinator of the Korean International Forum.
Let's advance into the path of the World Anti-Imperialist Front. The Iran War is a new flashpoint of the West Asian War. The West Asian War, which was centered on the Palestinian War in October 2023, has entered a new phase with the West Asian War centered on the Iran War in February 2026. Due to the Iran War, the unity of the anti-imperialist camp is being further strengthened, and the division of the imperialist camp is deepening further. The imperialist forces are driving the Iran-centered West Asian War to catalyze the East Asian War centered on the war in Taiwan, the East European War centered on the war in Ukraine, and the Central American War centered on the war in Venezuela. The provocations by imperialism and fascism against anti-imperialist countries, which are trying to prevent the expansion of the West Asian War into the East Asian, East European, and Central American wars, are increasing in intensity day by day. In May, 2 successive summits were held in Beijing. The China-US Summit and the China-Russia Summit, held in the midst of the Iran War and the West Asian War, drew the attention of the entire world at an extraordinary juncture ahead of the full-scale escalation of World War III. The USA is the representative nation of the imperialist camp, and China and Russia are the representative nations of the anti-imperialist camp. Reaffirming the agreements reached at the last year's BRICS summit, China and Russia agreed to strengthen unity and cooperation in various fields of the anti-imperialist camp. The focus is on the China-US summit. Although the media mainly mentions the exchange of China's demands the 3T and the US demands the 5B, the possibility of an exchange between intervention of China in the Iran war and non-intervention of the USA in the Taiwan war cannot be denied. The unusual high praise, such as Trump's historical deal and Xi Jinping's constructive China-US relationship of strategic stability, suggests a non-disclosed agreement between the two sides. In fact, Xi Jinping met with Putin shortly thereafter and immediately visited Pyongyang. Xi Jinping's article contributed to the Godong Shinmun, the organ of the Central Committee of the Workers' Party of Korea, is filled with strategic and far-reaching content aimed beyond the peninsula, the region, and the world, including post-war international order, second centenary goal, new historical starting point, inclusive economic globalization, and building a community with a shared future for humankind. The USA signed the Islamabad Memorandum of Understanding, which is favorable to Iran despite opposition from Israel. World War III is entering a new phase with the potential for Taiwan-centered East Asian War following the Iran-centered West Asian War. The Islamabad Memorandum of Understanding is in jeopardy due to Israel's occupation of southern Lebanon and Iran's blockade of the Strait of Hormuz. It could be resumed at any moment. If the East Asian War breaks out, it will be recorded in history as the full-scale escalation of World War III. Furthermore, there is a high possibility that it will expand into the East European War and the Central American War. We must not overlook that despite Russia's successive grim warnings, Ukraine's drone attacks against the Russian heartland are perilously escalating. For Netanyahu and Zelensky, the representative puppets of imperialism, the cessation of a war is nothing less than a political death sentence. Imperialism has announced a Fortress Western Hemisphere strategy termed NSS 2025 and NDS 2026, and is executing it step by step. It must be viewed that the Iran-centered West Asian war instigated by imperialism inherently possessed the nature of ground-clearing operations to focus on the Western Hemisphere afterwards. The US Republican administration stands at the crossroads between the lame duck of defeat or its opposite ahead of the November election. If the current ruling forces cannot quickly end the Iran war and further wrap up the Ukraine war, a crushing defeat in the election is inevitable as a consequence of the price hikes triggered by the surge in oil prices. The reasons are clear why the US government is seeking to lower oil prices by bringing the Iran war to an early end and then drawing Iranian and Russian crude back into the international market, attempting it to distribute cash through the populist One Big Beautiful Bill Act policy, and clinging to the achievements of the China-US summit diplomacy lies nowhere else. The fiscal crisis of a $39 trillion national debts and $1 trillion in annual interest is threatening not just the US dollar hegemony, but the US economy itself. This means that the fiat money system, the very foundation of inflation and the debt economy, has encountered its fundamental limit. The contradictions among the political forces locked in a power struggle within the USA, the head of modern imperialism, are increasingly adding to their hostile character and moving toward the fatal stage. In today's world, the strategic battle between the imperialist camp provoking World War III and the anti-imperialist camp deterring it is sharpening across various regions and fields. The Ukraine war in Eastern Europe, which began with a 2014 Maidan coup, became full-scale with Russia's special military operation in February 2022, and has since expanded to an irreversible state with the escalation of the West Asian War from the October 2023 Palestinian War to the February 2026 Iran War. Meanwhile, the provocation of a local war against the DPRK and the military coup attempted between September to November and December 2024 by US imperialism and its fascist puppet, the Yoon Suk-yeol government, were crushed by the DPRK's war deterrence and strategic patience alongside the heroic struggle of the RK people. If a war in the RK had broken out at the time, it would have immediately expanded into the Taiwan War and spread into the East Asian War centered on the war in the RK. The imperialist camp views the East Asian War as essential in elevating World War III to a full-scale stage, and is now attempting to ignite the Taiwan-centered East Asian War through the Iran-centered West Asian War. During the 50 days of the Iran War, US imperialism consumed an average of about 50% of its advanced conventional weapons, an amount that would take 3 to 4 years to replenish. This means that if the Taiwan War or the war in the ROK breaks out, there will be a severe shortage of weapons to deploy. As is well known, since China and DPRK are nuclear missile superpowers armed with hydrogen bombs and hypersonic missiles, the USA cannot properly intervene in the Taiwan War or a war in the ROK if it lacks advanced conventional weapons. This explains the reason why the USA, along with the November election, is in a hurry to wrap up the Iran war. The background behind the holdings of the US-China summit in Beijing is in the same context. Facing a perilous international situation where the Ukraine war broke out and could spread into World War III, the communist and anti-imperialist forces formed the World Anti-Imperialist Platform in Paris, France in October 2022. Since its launch and up to the present July 2026, the platform has consistently and powerfully pursued its three major goals: the global anti-imperialist struggle, the ideological warfare against opportunism, and the strengthening of the communist movement by holding more than 10 international anti-imperialist conferences. Today, we face an unprecedented crisis in which the flames of World War III, instigated by imperialism, could spread from Ukraine through West Asia to East Asia, Eastern Europe, and Central America. As history proves, as the world situation intensifies, the divisive maneuvers of opportunist forces within the communist camp and the anti-imperialist camp intensify in lockstep, reviving the historical experience of World War II, where the global anti-fascist front was formed to annihilate fascism. The anti-imperialist camp is now forming a world anti-imperialist front to lead World War III to victory. Ever since its founding, the platform has consistently placed high importance on the ideological warfare against opportunism, promoting unity within the communist camp and unity within the anti-imperialist camp. In 2026, the platform joined the formation of the Sovintern in Moscow, Russia in April, and actively participated in the international events of the Communist Party of the Russian Federation in May. Furthermore, in Nairobi, Kenya, this May, despite the direct fascist suppression by the William Ruto regime, we unflinchingly held an international anti-imperialist conferences and carried out vigorous anti-imperialist and anti-fascist actions on the occasion of the Africa-France Summit, holding high the banner of anti-imperialism and anti-fascism along with revolutionary Pan-Africanism. Now, on the occasion of the NATO Summit, the platform is organizing international anti-imperialist events this July in Istanbul, Turkey, to form a world anti-imperialist front and wage an anti-imperialist struggle against the imperialist forces instigating World War III. Imperialism can never block our path forward. The platform will surely achieve ultimate victory on the path of the world anti-imperialist front and on the righteous path to overthrow imperialism. Thank you very much, comrades.
Thank you, comrades. We will now proceed with the reading of the Istanbul Declaration. The declaration will be delivered in Turkish. Please click the interpretation button at the bottom of your screen and select English as your interpretation language.
Yoldaşlar, başlamadan önce size bir iki noktada bilgi vermek istiyorum. Sizlerin de bildiği gibi bu konferans aslında yüz yüze ve İstanbul'da yapılacaktı. Fakat faşist iktidarın baskı ve saldırıları sonucu ilk olarak konferans hazırlık komitesinde bulunan 12 yoldaşımız tutuklandı. Ardından içinde delegelerin de olduğu 24 yoldaşımız gözaltına alındı ve bu saldırılar hala sürmektedir. An itibariyle 24 yoldaşımız tutuklanma talebiyle mahkemeye sevk edilmiş durumdadır. Konferans Ankara'da olmadığı için doğrudan bir yasaklanma olmadı. Ama dolaylı olarak engellemek için her şeyi yaptılar. Hala bu ağır faşist saldırı, baskı sürüyor. Çünkü halkların katili NATO'ya sorunsuz gül bahçesi sunmak istiyorlar. Bu faşist düzeni yıkmak biz devrimcilerin sorumluluğudur. Uluslararası antifaşist, anti-emperyalist platformun bileşenleri olarak yeryüzünde emperyalizmi, kapitalizmi ve faşizmi yok edene, insanlığın özgürlüğünü sağlayacak sosyalizmi kurana kadar mücadelemiz sürecektir. Şimdi İstanbul Deklarasyonu'nu okuyorum. Savaş makinası NATO'yu dağıtın. Savaşın temel nedeni olan emperyalizmi yeniniz. Temmuz 2026'da NATO Ankara'da bir zirve düzenleyecek. Bu zirvenin amacı
NATO will hold its summit in Ankara. The purpose of this summit is to further discuss and review the implementation of last year's Hague Summit decision to raise military spending by all NATO member states to 5% of GDP.
tartışmak ve gözden geçirmektir. Ayrıca
It is also intended to strengthen support for Ukraine, isolate Iran, and intensify the encirclement of China. Through NATO, the Indo-Pacific partners, IP4, including Japan, the Republic of Korea, Australia, and New Zealand, are being drawn into military standardization and the integration of intelligence systems. A NATO joint forum with the 4 Gulf states, which are Qatar, the UAE, Bahrain, and Kuwait, as well as the NATO Defense Industry and Emerging Technologies event, are also scheduled as a part of this summit. The joint forum is a venue for imperialist propaganda, while the defense industry event serves as an opportunity to integrate AI-based offensive weapon systems between NATO and pro-NATO states. NATO's maneuvers to intensify World War III are thus unfolding in a systematic and comprehensive manner. It has now been more than 4 years since the war in Ukraine, set in motion by the 2014 Maidan coup, and entering a full-scale phase with Russia's special military operation in February 2022, which was launched as an unavoidable measure to halt NATO's eastward expansion. World War III, that was started by imperialism in this way, spread from Ukraine to West Asia, including Palestine in October 2023, and has since moved toward East Asia. In July 2024, through the Washington Summit and RIMPAC exercise, NATO completed the pacificization of NATO, not only politically but militarily as well. Then, in the autumn of the same year, 2024, the aggressive imperialist forces and the Republic of Korea, ROK fascist forces, escalated their war provocations against the Democratic People's Republic of Korea and attempted a coup within the ROK, pushing the ROK and East Asia as a whole to the brink of war. In February 2026, the imperialist aggression launched by US imperialism and Israeli Zionists against Iran and other parts of West Asia once again placed the world in an extremely dangerous situation. Now we cannot hear him. Görmüyoruz. Metinden okuyalım. Now we cannot hear him, but I will be following the English translation of the text. NATO is conducting a large-scale multi-domain joint military exercise in Europe on a daily basis, and the spearhead of its attack is aimed entirely
Comrades,
NATO bir savaş
yes,
makinesi
we
ve katliam
would
makinesi
like
ise
to recommend
emperyalizm
you
de savaşın baş suçlusu ve tüm kötülüklerin kaynağıdır. Emperyalizm, NATO'yu 3. Dünya Savaşı'nın karargahı olarak kullanarak tüm dünyada bir nükleer savaş fırtınası koparmaya çalışmaktadır. NATO'nun feshedilmesi ve emperyalizmin devrilmesi, barış, bağımsızlık ve sınıfsal kurtuluş arzusunda olan dünya halklarının en acil görevidir ve bunlar insanlığın kurtuluşuna giden stratejik merkezi halkayı oluşturmaktadır. Halkın arzusu savaş değil, barış. Egemenlik değil, bağımsızlık. Boyun eğme değil, kurtuluştur. Günümüzde NATO karşıtlığı ve
Liberation,
anti-emperyalizm,
not subordination. Today, being anti-NATO and anti-imperialism are the only ways to prevent war, safeguard peace, and escape from domination and subordination. They are the banner of justice. Since its founding in October 2022, the World Anti-Imperialist Platform, which has consistently waged practical struggles against NATO and imperialism, as well as an ideological warfare against opportunism, will continue to fight even more vigorously at the forefront without faltering. We are convinced that the people throughout the world, firmly united in the World Anti-Imperialist Front, will put an end to NATO and imperialism through an all-people's resistance and bring forward the realization of the historical cause of the permanent peace and global independence. This spans NATO, which is a war machine and a machine of massacre. Down with imperialism, the main culprit of war and the root of all evil. World Anti-Imperialist Platform, July 2026.
Nereden?
I think this is the end of the declaration.
Thank you. Today, despite the imperialist and fascist repression, we have successfully held the Istanbul International Anti-Imperialist Conference. We have successfully held the Istanbul International Anti-Imperialist Conference online. Today's experience will help us disseminate the voice of World Anti-Imperialist Platform to the people around the world more quickly, more accurately, and on the broader scale. Tomorrow, International Conference of the World Anti-Imperialist Women's Platform will begin at 10 a.m. Istanbul time, followed by the founding conference of the World Anti-Imperialist Workers Platform at 2 p.m. at Istanbul time. Thank you for your all participation and your all hard work. We will see you tomorrow.
Hasta la victoria siempre. Ready for the revolution. Down with imperialism. Down with NATO.
Yanizm yaşasın.
The people
The
united
Turkish
will never be
slogans
defeated.
are saying that down with imperialism, down with fascism.
Down with fascism. Down with imperialism. Disband NATO. Long live the World Anti-Imperialist Platform.
네, 사진을 말씀드리고
In Free Palestine.
Free, free Palestine.
Free Palestine.
Thank
Free
you for
from
everybody.
the river to the sea, Palestine will be free.
Yes.
Long live the Iranian Revolution. Long live the axis of resistance.
Thank you, all of us, for the beautiful contributions.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, all the organizers and interpreters.
Yes.